The narrator watches Emily clutch Noah as the door rattles, and she tastes the copper of panic. Mark said, "You set me up," and the hallway swallowed his footsteps. Emily said, "Do not wake, baby," as Noah burrowed into her sweater. Sirens coil through the night, and the apartment holds its breath like glass. Mark said, "This is not over," and the deadbolt thudded like a gavel. Emily said, "It is only us," but the lie shivered in the air. She traces the bruise of old promises while the kettle clicks, cold and useless. Noah said, "Is it loud?" And she nods, afraid of words that might break him. The narrator feels her pulse count the cost of every year she survived. Emily said, "I will protect you," and the vow lands heavier than the door. The narrator finds the apartment paused at dawn, and Emily folds the blanket like a treaty she hopes will hold. "Noah," said, "will he come back?" And she lets the question linger between cereal and silence. Emily said, "We have school and work," and schedules mask the quake in her voice. She dresses him with practiced ease, building armor from buttons and laces. The kettle finally sings, late to the crisis, and she pours courage into a chipped mug. Emily said, "You love the science fair," and Noah nods as if joy might return on cue. The hallway smells of rain and old paint, while keys chatter in her palm. She scans the peephole, rehearsing calm. Emily said, "We move forward," and the narrator notes how forward feels like a narrow bridge over deep water. The narrator rides the subway with them, and the car hums like a tired heart. Emily said, "Hold the pole," and Noah obeys with solemn focus. Commuters wear the same rain, the same Monday. She studies job emails that blink with polite threats. Emily said, "We will be early," and early feels like a small victory against chaos. An ad for custody mediation glares above the doors like a dare. Noah said, "Can we build the volcano tonight?" And hope sparks under ash. She smiles because he offers her the map back to ordinary. Emily said, "Yes, after dinner," and the narrator sees resolve tighten like a knot she will not let slip. The narrator enters the school lobby where warmth smells of crayons and wax. Emily said, "You are brave," and Noah believes her because she says it like truth. A receptionist smiles the way bridges smile over troubled water. Emily signs the clipboard as if signatures could steady weather. Noah said, "Pick me up early," and she calculates court calls and shifts in her head. Emily said, "I will try," and the word tries to stretch farther than it can. They hug, brief and fierce, like a seal pressed on a letter she cannot lose. The bell rings, scattering small storms into classrooms. The narrator notes how Emily stands a moment longer, relearning how to walk without the weight in her arms. The narrator follows Emily to a modest office where plants lean toward an overcast window. Lena said, "You look like you fought a storm," and Emily laughs because storms often look like men. She tells Lena the door slam, the threat, the sirens that stitched the night. Lena said, "Document everything," and slides a notebook across the desk like a shield. Emily said, "He will twist it," and fear tries to unspool her voice. Lena said, "Then we anchor you in facts," and the word anchor feels heavy and merciful. Emily writes dates, times, and the new shape of courage. The narrator watches ink become scaffolding around a fragile morning. Emily said, "For Noah," and the promise welds shut. The narrator joins Emily at the mailbox where official paper feels heavier than metal. Mark said, "Temporary motion filed by text that buzzes like a hornet." She steadies her breath as neighbors pass with grocery ghosts. Emily said, "He wants midweek overnights," and the words bruise the morning. She thinks of homework, light and night terrors, and the door that once shook. Lena said, "We will counter," through a call that threads courage into her ear. The narrator notes how resolve is a coat she keeps rebuttoning. Emily said, "Noah needs sleep, not threats," and the street hum answers without mercy. She folds the letter like a blade she refuses to use. Mark said, "You cannot keep him from me," and the echo scrapes the curb. The narrator watches her choose the slow, lawful road, while anger hammers for a sprint. The narrator sits with Emily in HR, where windows frame a sky the color of cautions. Dana said, budget restructuring, and the syllables tip like chairs. Emily said, my caseload is full, and metrics blink from a shared screen. The office smells of toner and polite endings. Dana said, your role shifts to part-time, and calendar squares shrink in her mind. The narrator hears the clink of numbers against rent and groceries. Emily said, I can take evenings, and the compromise tastes like aspirin. An email pings with corporate cheer that feels like cardboard. Dana said, we value your dedication, while the floor tilts a degree. The narrator notes how she smiles, so Noah will not notice the deficit. Emily said, send a new schedule, and gathers dignity like loose change. The narrator finds Lena and Emily at a diner where the coffee pretends to be courage. Lena said, Maya warned Mark, and the name lands like a dropped plate. Emily said, Maya was my friend, and the booth leather holds its breath. Lena lays screenshots like playing cards no one wants to win. The narrator sees trust unravel as neatly as stitches. Emily said, she knew about the report, and steam fogs her doubt. Lena said, he paid her rent once, and motive slides into view. The clock above the grill stutters in greasy light. Emily said, then she sold our quiet, and the cup trembles against the saucer. The narrator feels the room tilt toward decision. Lena said, we tighten the circle, and Emily nods because smaller now means safer. The narrator walks the corridor of a social services building where voices try to sound calm. Mr. Alvarez said, home visit pending, and protocol shuffles papers like weather. Emily said, we are available any evening, and she measures each word for steadiness. He scans forms with the precision of bridges. Mr. Alvarez said, we review school notes and routines, and the checklist taps its rhythm. The narrator notices how the word routine becomes a lifeline. Emily said, Noah reads after dinner, and she sees their small rituals gleam. Mr. Alvarez said, document exchanges with Mark, and his pen underlines the week. The hallway clock blinks an indifferent minute. Emily said, we will comply, and the promise sets like mortar. The narrator hears courage settle into the file. The narrator returns to the apartment where night has the hush of held breath. Maya said, I did not mean harm from the doorway she once entered without knocking. Emily said, you forwarded my affidavit, and the word forwarded feels surgical. Maya's eyes search for the old map. The narrator knows there is no path back through fresh ruins. Maya said he promised help, and the syllables shrink in the room. Emily said, you priced my child, and the lamp hum grows loud. Silence piles like boxes, no one will move. Maya said, I am sorry, and sorry staggers. Emily said, leave your key, and the past lies bright on the table. The narrator watches friendship fold into a thin metallic shape. The narrator follows Emily into her manager's office where spreadsheets glare like searchlights. Thomas said, your performance review is under question, and the words weigh more than the binders. Emily said, I met every deadline, while her voice fights to stay even. The hum of the HVAC feels like a warning drum. Thomas said, upper management needs proof of stability, and his tie sits too straight. The narrator sees her fingers curl beneath the table, small storms hidden. Emily said, I'll provide reports tonight, though the promise cuts into sleep she cannot spare. Thomas said, clients are uneasy, and the clock ticks too loudly. The narrator notes how a single email can erode a foundation. Emily said, I will not fail Noah, and the room exhales like a reluctant ally. The narrator waits in the crowded pharmacy as Emily counts bills twice. The clerk said, insurance flagged the refill, and the fluorescent buzz scratches the air. Emily said, it's for Noah's asthma, and her voice is a plea she cannot disguise. A toddler coughs nearby like a soft echo. The register beeps with clinical indifference. The clerk said, out of network now, and the line shuffles impatient feet. The narrator tastes her dread like copper pennies. Emily said, charge it, and the decision bruises her budget. The receipt prints a ribbon of quiet judgment. The narrator watches her fold the bag as if paper could hold back fear. Emily said, breathe, Emily, and the world smells of antiseptic and rain. The narrator rides with Emily on the bus where city lights smear like tears on glass. Lena said, Thomas called me, and the words hang heavy between brake squeals. Emily said, they want me gone, and her hands knot in her lap. The narrator hears the diesel hum echo her heartbeat. Lena said, we will find another path, and determination steals her voice. A teenager laughs 2 rows back, unaware of collapsing worlds. Emily said, Noah needs this job's insurance, and the truth lands sharp. The narrator feels the bus sway like fragile hope. Lena said, you are stronger than their politics, and the city outside blurs. Emily said, then I have to prove it, and her jaw sets like concrete curing in the dark. The narrator steps into the kitchen where Noah's volcano project waits like a small beacon. Noah said, is it okay if Dad helps next time? And the air chills. Emily said, he made promises he didn't keep, and the vinegar of past nights lingers. She smooths construction paper with trembling fingers. The narrator feels the tension hum beneath the fluorescent hum. Noah said, I just want him to come, and the ache is a whisper. Emily said, we will build this together, and the glue bottle squeaks open like a fragile truce. The smell of craft paint mingles with rain on the sill. The narrator watches her smile stretch into something nearly whole. Emily said, we will make it erupt bright, and hope flickers like a pilot light. The narrator follows Emily to the courthouse steps where shadows pool like questions. Lena said, the filing is official, and the stamp echoes in memory. Emily said, he will fight dirty, and the stone underfoot feels brittle. A gust whips her coat like restless wings. The narrator senses history pressing on her shoulders. Lena said, we build with truth, and her breath fogs in the cold. Emily said, truth bends in his hands, and the city hum waits. A street musician plays a mournful tune that threads between them. The narrator watches Emily grip the railing as if steel could promise mercy. Emily said, for Noah, and the words crystallize into resolve beneath the courthouse lights. The narrator watches Emily pace the living room, where late-night silence feels sharp. Lena said, Mark filed for emergency custody, and the phrase cracks the air. Emily said, he's using Noah's asthma against me, and the clock ticks too loud. The phone light flickers like a tiny alarm. Lena said, we will show stability, and her voice knits strength. Emily said, he twists every moment, and the carpet muffles her steps. The narrator senses exhaustion settling into her bones like winter. Noah stirs in his room, unaware of battles forming. Emily said, I will not lose him, and the vow etches itself in the dark. The kettle hums, but never whistles. The narrator notes how even breathing feels deliberate now. The narrator joins Emily outside Noah's school, where wind pulls at her scarf. Mark said, you never let me be a father, and the playground chains rattle. Emily said, you left when he needed you, and her voice steadies like a drawn bow. The children's laughter nearby feels distant. Mark said, the court will see through you, and the threat hangs like storm clouds. The narrator sees parents glance, then look away. Emily said, Noah deserves peace, and the bell rings, slicing the moment. Mark's smirk falters before he turns. The narrator feels the air shift, brittle and charged. Emily said, I will protect my son, and her hands tighten around the strap of her bag. The narrator steps into a dim bar where music hums like distant thunder. Emily said, one drink, then home, as she spots Maya by the jukebox. Maya said, I wanted to explain, and guilt softens her edges. Glasses clink like fragile truces. Emily said, you sold my trust, and the jukebox spins a sad ballad. The bartender polishes a glass, pretending not to hear. Maya said, I was desperate, and the admission cracks. The narrator feels the weight of choices made in corners. Emily said, desperation isn't an excuse, and her eyes glint like broken glass. Maya said, I regret it, but regret hangs limp. The narrator notes the way friendship fractures quietly, like ice beneath a boot. The narrator follows Emily to Noah's room, where shadows dance on superhero posters. Noah? Said, do people stop loving? And the question catches her breath. Emily said, love can get lost, but we can find it again, and she tucks the blanket. The narrator hears rain tapping like timid fingers. Noah said, will Dad be mad if I choose you? And the air tightens. Emily said, you do not have to choose love, and her voice trembles. The nightlight glows like a small guardian. The narrator watches her stroke his hair with deliberate tenderness. Emily said, dream of volcanoes and stars, and her smile is both armor and ache. Outside, thunder murmurs like distant judgment. The narrator stands in the courthouse hallway, where fluorescent lights hum like nerves. Lena said, Mark subpoenaed your texts, and the stack of papers looms. Emily said, he will twist my words, and her grip tightens on her tote. A bailiff walks past. Indifferent. Lena said, we counter with timelines and slides notes across the bench. The hallway smells of paper and faint disinfectant. Emily said, he wants to break me, and the words taste of steel. Lena said, he underestimates you, and her tone anchors the air. The narrator feels tension buzz like static between walls. Emily said, for Noah I stand, and the hum of the lights seems to soften. The narrator watches Emily linger at her apartment door as a knock reverberates like memory. She opens to reveal Grace, a figure from the edges of family photos. Grace said, I couldn't stay silent anymore, and her voice wavers like old film. Emily said, you disappeared when we needed you, and the hallway seems to shrink. Grace sets down a weathered envelope, a token of buried truths. The narrator senses old wounds stir like restless ghosts. Grace said, I watched from afar, and regret pools in her eyes. Emily said, spying isn't saving, and her words cut the quiet. Grace said, Mark's lies run deeper, and the air grows heavy. The narrator notes how trust is a fragile, unfamiliar visitor tonight. Emily said, come in, but tread carefully, and the threshold feels like a fault line. The narrator settles in the living room, where revelations crackle louder than thunder. Grace said, Mark hid assets in another account, and paper rustles like dry leaves. Emily said, you should have told me years ago, her voice a low flame. Grace said, I feared making it worse, and her shoulders sag. The narrator feels secrets rewrite the room's air. Emily said, Noah deserves honesty, and the clock ticks like a gavel. Grace said, I saved statements, sliding them across the coffee table. Emily said, this could expose him, and hope flickers in her chest. Grace said, it will, but it will hurt, and silence drapes over them. The narrator senses a fragile alliance forming amid old fractures. The narrator follows Emily and Lena to a quiet cafe where strategy steeps like tea. Lena said, Grace's documents are a game changer, and the steam curls upward. Emily said, Mark will fight dirtier now, and her spoon trembles. Grace said, he underestimates you both, and a faint smile ghosts her lips. The cafe hums with soft jazz and muted chatter. Lena said, we tighten evidence and witnesses, and she scribbles notes. Emily said, Noah must never feel this war, and her voice steadies. The narrator watches conviction settle over the table like snowfall. Grace said, I'll testify if needed, and the offer glints like fragile steel. Emily said, then we move forward, and the trio shares a weighted silence. The narrator rides with Emily and Noah on a park bench where leaves whisper of better days. Noah said, who is Grace? And curiosity sparks. Emily said, she is family we thought was lost, and the words taste of bittersweet. Noah said, can she help us? And his small hands toy with a twig. The park is quiet except for distant laughter. Emily said, she might, and a breeze scatters golden leaves. The narrator notes how trust begins small, like seedlings. Wallum guide you. Noah said, "Will Dad be mad?" And the question trembles. Emily said, "Truth matters more than anger," and her voice softens. The narrator feels autumn wrap around them like a fragile promise. The narrator stands in Lena's apartment where maps and notes carpet the table. Lena said, "This evidence shifts leverage," and her pen taps like a heartbeat. Emily said, "Mark will strike back harder," and determination sharpens her voice. Grace said, "Better to strike first with truth," and her gaze is steady steel. The narrator senses strategy building like storm clouds. Lena said, "We'll draft affidavits tonight," and her laptop hums. Emily said, "Noah is my anchor," and the words ground her. Grace said, "He is why we fight," and silence settles like armor. The narrator hears the city's night sounds beyond the window, a backdrop to resolve. Emily said, "Tomorrow, we begin," and resolve crystallizes. The narrator watches Emily stand outside the courthouse under a sky bruised with dawn. Lena said, "This is it," and her breath fogs in the chill. Emily said, "We fight with truth," though her hands tremble. Grace clutches the evidence folder like a sacred relic. The city stirs awake with indifferent traffic. Mark said, "You can't win," and his smirk cuts the morning air. Emily said, "For Noah I must," and the weight of years presses down. The narrator senses fear threading with steel in her spine. Lena said, "Stay focused," and the courthouse doors loom like gates. Emily said, "He won't define us," and the first step echoes across stone. The narrator enters the courtroom where echoes hold their breath. The judge said, "Proceed," and gavels time into motion. Mark's lawyer said, "Evidence of instability," and papers rustle like dry leaves. Emily said, "My home is safe and loving," her voice anchored. Lena slides exhibits across polished wood like chess pieces. Grace watches, hands clasped tight. The narrator feels tension hum like electric wire. Mark said, "She kept Noah from me," and the words sting. Emily said, "I protected him from chaos," and her eyes do not flinch. The judge said, "Continue," and the world narrows to the sound of pens scratching. The narrator feels the air tighten as Mark's lies unravel. Lena said, "Bank transfers prove concealment," and slide statements forward. Grace said, "These are his signatures," and the clerk's stamp thuds like thunder. Mark said, "This is irrelevant, but sweat beads betray him." Emily said, "The truth was hidden," and her voice is a blade. The narrator watches the judge's brow crease. Mark's lawyer said, "Objection," and the gavel silences the room. Emily said, "I shielded Noah, not secrets," and the tension snaps. The courtroom holds a breathless pause. The narrator senses victory flicker, but not yet ignite. The narrator steps outside the courtroom as recess is called, and the hallway hums with whispers. Lena said, "He's cornered," her voice low but fierce. Emily said, "I still fear his next move," and her hands tremble on the railing. Grace said, "His lies exposed him," and her tone is both relief and sorrow. The narrator feels the weight of fatigue on Emily's shoulders. Mark passes by without a word, his glare a silent threat. Emily said, "He won't break me," though her heart pounds. The vending machine hums in the corner like a mundane heartbeat. Lena said, "One more push," and the hallway clock blinks in different seconds. The narrator senses resolve crystallizing amid dread. The narrator returns to the courtroom for the climax where truth stands bare. The judge said, "Custody remains with Emily," and the gavel cracks like lightning. Mark's shoulders sag, anger flashing like broken glass. Emily said, "We will heal now," tears slipping silent. Grace exhales, her relief a quiet prayer. Lena said, "You did it," and the weight lifts slightly. The narrator feels the room exhale as the bailiff gathers files. Mark said, "This isn't over," but his voice wavers. Emily said, "It is for Noah's peace," and the moment seals. The judge's final glance carries weary compassion. The narrator senses the war shifting to rebuilding, even as scars remain. The narrator finds Emily stepping into her quiet apartment, the air lighter but unfamiliar. Lena said, "You're free now," and her smile flickers through fatigue. Emily said, "It doesn't feel like winning," and her coat slides from her shoulders. Grace sets the evidence folder aside like a spent weapon. Noah's laughter from the bedroom breaks the stillness like sunlight through blinds. The narrator senses relief tangled with loss. Emily said, "We survived," and her voice is both wonder and exhaustion. Grace said, "Healing will take time," and her gaze softens. Lena said, "Tonight is for breathing," and the city hum outside agrees. Emily said, "For Noah, we begin again," and the room exhales. The narrator watches Emily tuck Noah into bed, the storm finally distant. Noah said, "Does this mean he won't fight anymore?" and his small voice trembles. Emily said, "He may try, but we are safe," and she smooths the blanket. The nightlight glows like a guardian star. The narrator hears her heart steady as Noah yawns. Emily said, "Dream big, build worlds," and hope flickers. Noah said, "You'll be there, right?" and her answer comes without pause. Emily said, "Always," and the word wraps the room in quiet strength. Outside, the city sighs under rain's faint memory. The narrator senses new beginnings, hiding in the dark. The narrator joins Emily and Grace at a kitchen table where steam curls from 2 mugs. Grace said, "Your mother would be proud," and emotion softens her face. Emily said, "I doubted myself too long," and her fingers trace a chip in the mug. The clock ticks steady now, not accusing. Grace said, "Families break and mend," and the phrase feels like a balm. Emily said, "Noah deserves roots, not scars," and conviction steadies her voice. The narrator senses forgiveness settling between them like fresh paint. Grace said, "I will stay close," and the promise glows. Emily said, "Then we build something better," and hope stretches across the table like morning light. The narrator accompanies Emily and Lena at a small neighborhood park. Lena said, "There's a job opening downtown, and possibility sparks." Emily said, "A fresh start feels terrifying," and her laugh is fragile. Children's laughter skips across the breeze like kites. Lena said, "You've carried worse storms," and the wind lifts her hair. Emily said, "Noah deserves more than survival," and the playground squeak answers. The narrator senses courage blooming in cautious soil. Lena said, "You're stronger than yesterday," and the moment hums with promise. Emily said, "Then we step forward," and her smile breaks through like sun after rain. The narrator closes on a peaceful evening where the world finally exhales. Emily stands at Noah's doorway, listening to his steady breath. She places a hand on the doorframe, a silent promise. The city outside hums with distant horns and life continuing. Emily said, "We're stronger now," and the words are a vow to herself. The narrator feels a quiet victory settle over the apartment. She sits beside Noah, brushing a curl from his forehead. The lamp casts a gentle halo, washing away the courtroom's harsh light. Emily whispers, "We'll never stop fighting," and a genuine smile breaks across her face. The narrator leaves them bathed in fragile, enduring hope.